Meet Hans, the main character of our events, and now we will see how he dies in the future. We understand that the main character is surrounded by a large bunch of zombies and is at a dead end. Now we see that, apparently, Hans has been bitten by a zombie and is bleeding. The main character cannot get up and understands that apparently this is the end. We see a zombie who was previously a soldier sneaking up on him. The main character remembers how it all began and how the world came to the point where now there are practically only zombies on the planet. Hans thinks that because of the greed and malice of humanity, it was unable to resist the emerging epidemic. After the zombie apocalypse, humanity split into gangs and began to destroy itself. In this chaos, our main character Hans lived for about 3 years following his own rules. We see that the main character is left alone against a crowd of thousands of zombies. A horrific crowd of zombies has attacked Hans, and now it will be the end for him. Judging by the face of the main character, we understand that he is a fearless and self-confident guy who looks danger in the face. He fights against zombies to the end even though he knows he has very little time left. We see a crowd of zombies catch up with Hans and eat him. A moment later, Hans wakes up in his own bed and realizes that he has traveled back in time to 6 months before the zombie apocalypse and now has time to prepare. We see a young, beautiful girl welcoming Hans into the apartment she is going to sell him. A young girl talks about the delights of this super expensive apartment and how it has many rooms and necessary equipment. Hans buys this apartment on credit. The hero understands and knows the future, namely that in 6 months the apocalypse will come, and therefore he can take as many loans as he can and spend all the money he has. The main character does not stop there and takes out more loans from various banks, as he understands that these loans will not have to be repaid in the future. We see that Hans, knowing the future and that the zombie apocalypse is coming soon, begins to train hard. Hans realizes that there are 6 months left until the zombie apocalypse, and he doesn't have much time to prepare. He knows that in just a few months, the whole world will be plunged into the most brutal chaos. In addition to training, Hans is developing a plan to prepare for the future apocalypse. He goes to the store and buys all the necessary products so that he has a large supply. After buying groceries, Hans sits down at a cafe and begins to eat lunch. But he runs into his work colleagues. We see that Hans did not expect to see them here and is very surprised by this. We are shown Hans's co-workers, including his evil boss. We are shown the face of an angry boss who is unhappy that Hans has stopped going to work. Here we see that Hans remembers the future, and he remembers that the evil boss in the future became a coward and a weakling. Hans's evil boss tells him that he should go to work immediately or he will take action and punish him. Hans gets up and is about to leave, because there is no point in wasting his time talking to them. Suddenly Hans' boss grabs him by the clothes and says that he is not going anywhere. Hans turns around and tells the boss to remove his hand or he will kill him. We see the boss's surprised face as he had no idea he could get such an answer. Next we are shown the events that take place against this backdrop, namely a zombie devouring some girl. Hans notices this and immediately decides to do something. We see Hans take his sword out of his bag a second later. Hans's boss thinks that our hero has taken out his sword to kill him and screams in horror. However, we see that Hans ran towards the zombies. The rest of Hans's colleagues don't understand what's going on. We are shown how Hans confidently deals with the first zombie. He cuts it in two with his razor-sharp sword. We see that not a single muscle on our hero's face twitched, as he had done this thousands of times in the future. Hans notices that there is a whole crowd of zombies ahead. But in his mind, the apocalypse was supposed to start in 3 months, and he does not understand why it is happening so early. We see that there are already a lot of zombies on the street, and they are devouring people. People who were not prepared for this are terrified and fearful and don't know what to do. Hans wonders what changed since the apocalypse started earlier. Further on an advertising banner on the street, the news announces a general alarm about a zombie epidemic. Hans understands that now he needs to act according to his plan and heads to his shelter, but someone's hand pulls him back. With a sharp movement of his hand, which he has honed thousands of times, he knocks down the one who tried to pull him back. He points his sword and realizes it's just a girl. The girl in question shouts that her name is Chong-mi and that she is his co-worker. Hans says he simply didn't recognize her, although he understands that, having lived 3 years in the future, he simply forgot his colleagues. Chong-mi asks Hans to help her get home. Hans looks at her and remembers her from work, namely that she is a smart and sweet girl, but Hans refuses her. To this, Chong-mi begs him to help her. Hans agrees, but warns that he will not help if she causes trouble along the way. Hans gives the girl a small knife for self-defense and tells her the best way to kill zombies. We see Hans remaining calm and warming up before taking out the next wave of zombies. They show us up close and we see how terrible they are. Hans takes his sharp sword and prepares to use it in battle. Hans shows that the best way to kill a zombie is to hit it in the head, namely the neck, back of the head, or temple, demonstrating this on a real zombie. Then Hans starts killing zombies. Suddenly, a zombie appears behind the girl and knocks her to the ground. Chongmi starts screaming and calling for help. Hans turns around and sees the girl being bitten by a zombie. However, after this our hero turns back, as he warned her that he would not help if she got into trouble. The girl is terrified and realizes that no one will come to her aid. She begins to remember what Hans advised her, namely how to protect herself. Next, Chongmi strikes the zombie in the temple. We see that she overcomes him and kills him. With difficulty, the girl rises to her knees and looks forward. She sees Hans fearlessly cutting down zombies in all directions. We are shown that the young guy is very strong, agile, and calculating. The girl looks at all this and understands that if she wants to survive in this chaos, then she should be close to Hans. We are shown that Hans is finishing up dealing with all the zombies around him. Next, we see that these two are talking to each other. Hans asks if that zombie bit her and asks to show her the bite site. The girl understands that he saved her life, and she must fulfill Hans's request. We see that the girl begins to take off her clothes. We are shown that Chongmi has almost stripped off everything she had. However, our hero suddenly gets up and approaches her. With a sharp movement of his hand, he tears apart the bite site. He investigates how the zombies were bitten. Hans says that the zombie was unable to bite through the young girl's skin, and therefore did not infect her. The girl thanks Hans for his help and says that she wants to return to her family. Next, Chongmi asks Hans if he has a family. Hans thinks mysteriously and begins to remember. He remembers walking with his mother as a child. He remembers how good it was to hold her hand and be close. However, Hans replies that he has no family. Hans says that from now on he will go alone and that the girl needs to move on. Chongmi asks Hans to walk her a few more kilometers, but he refuses her. Finally, he gives her advice to avoid large human camps, and not to gather in groups of more than 20 people, so as not to cause a wave of zombies. Hans explains that a zombie wave is a phenomenon in which the noise of human camps with more than 20 people around them causes an army of thousands of zombies to gather. He says that if Chongmi wants to survive, she needs to be in a small group of people, half of whom should be trained in fighting. Finally, Hans also advises the girl to take care of herself. We see our main character come home covered in blood. We understand that his apartment is fully prepared for the apocalypse, since during this time, Hans has collected everything he needs. The apartment has food, water, and necessary supplies. Hans gets out of the shower and begins to rest and think about how he still has time to save the world from the future apocalypse. He especially thinks about a dangerous gang of people that will form in the future, and will be called the Soul Survivors Alliance. In the next scene, we are shown a hypermarket with food products and furniture. We see a crowd of zombies eating some person. His company members are watching this, but they are cowards and can do nothing about it. The leader of the group of people, Kang Kong, shouts that they need to run, otherwise they will all die like this guy. A group of young people quickly run across the store. A moment later, we are shown that one of the girls has been grabbed by zombies and they are starting to eat her. Another zombie is approaching a crowd of people, and right now, we need to take action to protect people. The group's leader, Kang Kong, begins to clear the way for his friends to pass on. On the way, they meet a couple more zombies who are going to attack this group of people. The company understands that now it is either fight or flight, but then everyone saw what their leader had come up with. We realize that Kang Kong has climbed onto the shelves of food and is giving everyone his hand so that they can climb up. We see Kang Kong pick up all his friends one by one, and he is the last one left. Suddenly, one zombie grabs Kang Kong's brother, whose name is Kong Hyuk, by the leg. The leader of the group takes out a kitchen knife, intending to use it to help his brother. With a sharp movement of his hand, he cuts off the zombie's hand and frees his brother. Now the heroes are thinking about what to do next, because zombies have filled the store. We see that zombies come to the noise and their numbers increase. A young girl named Sari suggests coming up with some kind of escape plan from this situation. The group's leader, Kang Kong, says that he will now sacrifice himself and distract the zombie horde while the others escape. Kang Kong's brother says he won't support this idea, and believes that everyone can get out alive. He stands up and starts holding his brother back so that he doesn't sacrifice himself for the good of the others. At this moment, a zombie that was taller and larger than the others grabs Kang Hyuk by the leg and takes him into the crowd of zombies. We see that his brother wants to save him, but the people around him do not allow him to do this because they believe that he can no longer be helped. Suddenly, an arrow flies into the head of that big zombie, and Kang Hyuk survives. We are shown Hans standing confidently on a food shelf, holding a crossbow in his hands. Kang Hyuk cries because he is almost saved. However, we are shown that the test is not over as the crowd of zombies continues to surround Kang Hyuk. He tries to escape from them and crawls between the legs of one zombie. Another one suddenly appears on his way and is about to bite him. A black sharp sword, cutting through the air, is already flying towards the neck of this zombie, and we understand perfectly well who it belongs to. 4 zombies receive a well-aimed crossbow arrow to the head in 2 seconds. Like a wild falcon with divine vision, Hans shoots all the infected. Kang Hyuk looks at Hans and thinks that an angel himself came down from heaven and saved his life. An incredibly beautiful shot of Hans jumping into a crowd of zombies and swinging his razor-sharp sword. Like paper houses, the infected ones fall one by one to the floor from Hans' blows. In the wild dance of a hot battle, Hans feels at home, because in the future he has been exterminating these creatures for more than 3 years and is not afraid of anything. Like a dancer, Hans approaches each zombie and pronounces a death sentence on it. When Hans was almost finished, it seemed like a light haze was coming out of his body, as if he was a killing machine for the infected. Hans tells a group of people to follow him if they want to survive this situation. All the people who watched Hans exterminate the crowd of zombies thought in their heads that this man could actually save them. Hans tells them to go down and run after him, as he knows the way out. A crowd of young people descend and begin to help Hans hunt zombies. The group leader is attacked from behind by an infected woman. At that moment, a metal tin can flies at her head. We see that friends in this company protect each other. Hans takes the entire group of young people to a safe place he knows inside the store. Hans sits down in a comfortable soft chair, catches his breath from the heated battle, and tells Kang Hyuk to take off his clothes. The guy is surprised and does not understand why he should do this. Suddenly, Hans remembers the events from the future, and realizes that in the future, he met this group of people, including Kong Kon, who sacrificed himself for him. He remembers that in the future, unfortunately for him, everything turned out to be a tragic death. Hans remembers Kang's actions and realizes that he is a good person and can be trusted. Next, Kang introduces himself and begins to get to know Hans, because he does not know that in the future they were already friends. Hans also greets him and begins to remember the future events that happened to Kang's brother. Specifically, he remembers that in the future, Kang's brother died when a large zombie stole him from a store shelf. In the future, everyone else had to flee after Kang's brother died. However, of all of them, only Kang himself survived. While the group of people were discussing how they had just survived, Hans also began to reason. He realizes that he has just saved everyone, and in doing so he has changed the future, meaning he will no longer be able to predict future events involving this group of people. Hans stands up and asks how much food the group has left. Kang starts to get worried and asks if Hans wants to rob them. To this, Hans replies that he is alone and has already guessed that they have food. Kang begins to ask how Hans was able to survive alone, since the zombie apocalypse has been going on for over 3 months by this time. All these questions are also very interesting to Kang's group, as they are a little afraid of Hans after what they saw. Hans replies that he had food at home all this time, since he is a thrifty person. And besides, he can hunt zombies and follows his own rules. Kang says they have about 40 people left in the camp, and they need food to survive. Suddenly, Hans replies that he knows that there is a warehouse with food and water in this store, but the paths to it are blocked. These products are located several floors below, and everyone must work together to get them. Kang realizes that it is impossible to transport food through the zombie horde and asks how they will do it. To this, Hans replies that they will kill every zombie that gets in their way. Kang panics at what he hears, as they have been barely fighting the zombies this entire time, but have been trying to run away from them. Hans says that he has a plan, and people need to follow it in order to survive. A group of people are hesitant, but they accept Hans' offer. They go down the stairs straight to the group's camp. Kang opens the doors and shows Hans where all the other people live. The camp is a floor with furniture and other household items. Hansa is greeted by another camp member named Jong Hwan. He tells Hans that they blocked all the doors that lead into this hall except one so that they could leave, which is why they are still alive. Hans speaks to the rest of the camp and says that in order to survive, they need to work together, and invites them to go with him to get food. However, almost all the people from this camp turn out to be cowards and reject Hans' offer. A girl named Sari approaches Hans and says that people do not trust him because bad thieves have come here before and robbed them. Hans is surprised and wonders if it was the Soul Survivors gang. He remembers that this gang of cruel thieves and murderers who ruled the streets in the future. However, Sari says that it wasn't them, and that these people also took 6 girls, including her sister. Hans says he doesn't yet understand how he can help in this situation. At this, Sari begins to take off her clothes. We see that the girl has a very good figure, and she continues to undress. Hans yells at her, asking her why she is doing this. Siri replies that she wanted to satisfy Hans that he helped her. Hans says that he will find her sister as soon as he has the chance, as he hates thieves and is ready to kill them. The girl is surprised and does not understand why he needs this and why he refused the offer to satisfy him. Hans replies that his mission is to save this world of bastards and freaks like those people. Next, we see a dialogue between Hans and Kang, who discuss how to motivate the camp to start fighting against the zombies. Hans realizes that Kang doesn't know what to do yet and decides to do everything himself. Hans begins to tell Kang his plan, which is not yet revealed to us. In the next scene, Kang is speaking in front of the people and is about to give Hans a chance to speak. However, turning around, he sees that he is not there and has gone somewhere. Suddenly, the door to the camp is opened by Hans's foot, who is holding an infected monster by the hair. He throws it into the hall and everyone sees it. The crowd of people starts screaming in fear and horror, as they are all cowards, but Hans offers them to practice hunting monsters. The first person to volunteer is a beautiful girl, Siri. Hans likes this and calls her over to him. He shows her a pair of specially made bracers to protect against zombie bites, and asks her to put them on. Siri wears special bracers and looks rather ridiculous in them, and she also wears heels like a real beauty. Hans shows exactly how to kill zombies. He says that you always have to be prepared and that zombies are quite slow and clumsy. Hans shows exactly how to finish off the infected, and that there is no need to be afraid or hesitant when doing so. They show us that they have dealt with one infected person. It was Siri who managed to finish off the zombies under Hans's supervision. We see that the zombie hunting training continues. This time Hans has to demonstrate his techniques on a former police officer. Luckily, this zombie still had a gun from when he was human. Minso also trains to defend himself by hunting zombies that Hans brings. She is shocked by how much she had to change herself to become stronger. We see that the training is taking place in public, and only 8 people out of the entire crowd are ready to fight. Hans's plan was for one group to block the entrance doors on the first floor, while the second group on the left took the food supplies. We see that our heroes are full of determination and confidence as they go about fulfilling this mission. Also accompanying them are the rest of the camp members who agreed to help. In the next stage, we see how brave young people begin to fight against the infected. Suddenly, Sari falls to the floor and loses her composure. At that moment, a terrible and scary zombie attacks her. Hans yells at her to pull herself together and start defending herself. He tells her to take out her knife and attack the zombies. Hans then realizes that if he doesn't do something now, Sari will die. He jumps over the crowd of people and starts attacking the zombies. With a kick of his right leg, he knocks all the brains out of this monster. Then, with a somersault and extraordinary agility gained from years of training, Hans deals with another zombie. And now we see that, as if in a shooting gallery, Hans shoots a crowd of zombies with precise shots to the head. Siri was very impressed by Hans's latest demonstration of his fighting abilities, and even felt a little embarrassed. Then a group of people with Hans went to catch up with the remaining people. We see that the second group also completed their task and cleared the territory of zombies. However, Kang Kong stands up and says that he needs to admit something. Kang Kong removes the glove from his right hand, and we see that it is covered in blood. Hans is surprised by this, since the blood on his right hand is most likely from a bite. Kang says that he was indeed bitten by a zombie when they were killing more infected. Hans puts a gag in Kang's mouth, and that can only mean one thing. In the next scene, we see Hans raising his razor-sharp sword over Kang's hand. Hans understands that cutting off his hand is the only way out of this difficult situation. Hans cuts off Kang's arm and it is immediately bandaged. Zhang Huan carries Kang on his shoulders as he passes out. Another pack of zombies approaches the group of young people. Everyone decides to run back to safety. We see that they have returned to the camp and are knocking on the door. Upon returning to camp, the people around are surprised to see Kanga being carried in their arms. Hans then goes on to tell what happened. Some people start to criticize Hans for cutting off this guy's hand. Hans himself begins to worry about what he has done, but he understands that he had no other choice. Kang is placed in the infirmary and cared for until he regains consciousness. A few hours later, Hans announces that they have obtained food, and that they will now be in a room behind a locked door, and he will have the keys. All of Hans's supporters begin to carry food items inside this room. However, not everyone likes this state of affairs, and many are beginning to express disagreement. Hans explains that food will now be given out strictly per person to prevent hunger strikes, and that those who risk their lives must eat better. The crowd of cowards doesn't like this even more, since they will now get less food. Suddenly a diaper flies at Hans. Some hysterical mother with a child is yelling at him. Hans bends down and looks at what was thrown at him. He sees that there was baby shit in that diaper. Hans thinks and realizes that these people are ungrateful cowards. Next, a crowd of people runs towards Hans, who do not agree with the fact that he has become the leader of this camp, and that he now sets his own rules. At this point, Hans remembers how he offered these people to go fight with him, but they were all afraid, After this, we see Hans take his pistol out of his holster. In the next scene, we see a gunshot hole in the floor and a group of people who were afraid of Hans. He says that he is the boss here, and now everyone will obey his orders. Hans is confident in himself because he has already helped many of these people, and he is the only hope for survival of this camp. All the people silently accept what he says, since they can do nothing to counter his words. Next, the food products are clearly distributed on the shelves. We see that they are starting to give them out to everyone according to portions. People are very hungry and want to eat, so they are very happy with new products. After this, people start coming to the group of Hans's supporters and asking how they can help the camp so that they can also get more food. Hans realizes that his plan to unite people is working. Hans then begins to consider who he can leave as leader in his absence. He recalls that he wanted to make Kang the leader of the camp. He then thinks that the rest of the squad are either too naive or too old. Siri is a brave girl, but she is also not yet ready to become the leader of the squad. Hans doesn't yet understand who he can make his deputy. After thinking about Siri, she appears in his head and seems to seduce him. A few hours later, Hans decides to give her a task, namely to write a notice that they will put up on the windows of their store in case any survivors pass by. Sari is writing this ad. Hans says that he is tired and wants to rest. We see that our hero doesn't have a bed, so he sleeps on the floor. Suddenly, Siri knocks on his door and says that there is a problem in the camp. Namely, she says that the toilets have run out of water. Hans realizes that with so many people in the camp, this is a really big problem. Hans gathers the people and announces that the water has run out. People are nervous and don't know what to do next. Hans comes up with a plan to clear the roof of zombies and get the cisterns and pump running to supply water. In the next scene, we see that our heroes have started to carry out the plan and are already clearing the area of zombies. Hans walks through the cleared area of the store and sees that the last zombie remains there. With a precise shot from a crossbow, he finishes off the last one. Everyone is happy that everything is going well so far. Evening comes, and Hans's squad begins to carry out the second part of the plan. He says he'll check out the parking lot first. Through the crack in the door, he sees a dangerous situation. Namely, in the parking lot leading to the pumps, there is a large number of zombies that even their group cannot cope with. Hans tells everyone that it will be very difficult to cope. Then Hans comes up with a plan and asks if there are any mechanics among the people. To this, the young guy says that before the apocalypse, he worked as a car mechanic for 4 years. Hans is glad to hear this and suggests a very interesting plan. We see that Hans's plan is making people nervous. In the next scene, part of Hans's squad is running from a horde of zombies in a parking lot. It turns out that their task is to distract the zombies so that Hans and the auto mechanic can find cars and block the zombies' path with them. Hans is already starting to look for a car to drive, but at first he is unsuccessful. He still manages to find one with the ignition keys in the passenger compartment. Hans tells the mechanic to prepare the car. However, he tells him that he needs to find a suitable battery. Then the two of them go looking for the battery, and they see the car they need and want to open it. There is someone knocking from inside this car. Hans opens the doors and sees something horrifying. It turns out that there is a little zombie girl sitting inside the salon. Hans thinks for a second, but does what he must. A moment later, our heroes are running across the parking lot with the discovered battery. A crowd of zombies is chasing them and trouble could happen. Hans protects the mechanic while he installs the battery. Hans understands that now there will be a battle in which he must give his best. We are transported behind the zombies, and from here we can clearly see how Hans begins to exterminate this crowd. Hans is getting very tired and his strength is almost gone, and the crowd of zombies is getting bigger. Hans gives his last strength to this fight. Now Hans is shouting at the mechanic to speed up, otherwise they will both die. It looks like everything could end very tragically for our heroes now, because the infected have already surrounded them. The mechanic shouts that he has finished fixing the car and they can go. Our heroes suddenly jump into the car, fighting off a crowd of zombies. Next, in the car, Hans and the auto mechanic destroy the rest of the zombie crowd much faster. Our main character drives very well and wants to get there in time for the others. We see that the second part of the group has also started the truck by this time. The truck must be positioned parallel to the exit, and Hans must cover the remaining gap with his car. This is what the passage looks like, which our heroes have almost closed. The mechanic who is sitting in the car with Hans shouts that they are going to crash. However, Hans keeps his cool and drives backwards. The trip ends with a sharp blow and the path for the zombies is blocked. Now we understand what exactly Hans's plan was. The third group of people, who had been distracting the main part of the zombies all this time, also survived by climbing onto the truck. They begin to finish off the last of the infected. Hans sees that they have one last effort left to make and joins them, cutting down the crowd of zombies from behind. So this battle is over and our heroes lie without strength. Hans says to bring the rest of the camp to the parking lot to help clean up the area. We see that the rest of the camp members have arrived at the parking lot. Hans shows them that they need to put all the zombie corpses in order to be able to stay here. Not everyone can stand this picture, and the girl starts to feel sick. Then people begin to clean up the area and remove the corpses. Hans discovers another warehouse with food products that apparently did not have time to be delivered to the store before the apocalypse. Everyone around was very happy about this. Next, people from the camp begin to deliver food to the appropriate room. Even beer is found in food products. And here is a young girl running towards the fresh air, because the street is visible from the parking lot. We understand that because this girl has been living in a camp for 3 months, she hasn't even seen the sky. While on the roof of the store, Hans notices a hospital and thinks that he needs to get there and get medicine for Kang. After this, people begin to burn the corpses of the zombies they killed. Then everyone returns to camp and celebrates the victory. Suddenly, an old man comes up to Hans and says that there is bad news. Namely, the old man said that Kang died. This leaves our heroes in complete shock. Hans goes to Kang's room and makes sure. In reality, Kang died from blood loss. Everyone begins to mourn the death of a good and worthy man from the camp. Kang's brother, who cannot cope with the loss of a loved one, feels especially bad. Kang's brother takes his body and takes it away, as he wants to bury it in the cemetery with his parents. Luckily for him, there are no zombies on this side, and he calmly takes his brother to the cemetery. A few hours later, inside the camp, we see a young girl handing Hans some soup she had just prepared. Hans tries it and really likes it. The girl is embarrassed and says that before the apocalypse, she was a cook. In the next scene, we see someone's hand reaching for food in a warehouse. Hans notices this and stops the theft. The woman turns around abruptly and groceries fall out of her clothes. She is afraid of Hans and says that she took the food for her child. Hans forgives her and says that they will get more food so that there is enough for everyone. The woman bursts into tears from the kindness of our hero, and after that, Hans leaves. In the next scene, we see that the old man has called an emergency meeting. He announces that there were attempts to forcibly take possession of 2 women in the camp. Everyone is shocked by what they hear. The old man says that the evil male members of the camp wanted to take Sari and another girl by force. According to the old man, Sari fought back and stabbed one of them with a knife. Everyone starts discussing how they will deal with these men and suggests different options. Hans suddenly rises from the table and says that in this camp, he will make the rules and there will be no equality. Hans states that the men who attacked Sari must be killed, as the knife is contaminated with zombie blood, and they will turn into zombies anyway, and they are bad people. They start arguing with Hans, and he agrees to a compromise and decides to kick the bad man out of the camp. This decision seems logical in order to reduce the number of people in the camp. Hans once again reminds everyone about such a phenomenon as a zombie wave. He says that the zombie wave may include mutated monsters that seek out large groups of people. Next, we see that Zhang Huan gives the keys to the room where the men who attacked the women are locked up. Hans says they'll just throw these guys out on the street. Hans opens the door with a key, but hears some strange sound behind the door. Upon opening the door, Hans and Yang are attacked by 3 zombies. Hans hits the first zombie with a sharp punch to the face. We see that the blow was so strong that Hans pushed away all 3 with 1 blow. After this, our characters deal with the transformed men. Apparently, they were transformed by cutting their hands with an infected knife. Hans gives the weapon to Yang and says that he will be his deputy. The protagonist says that he sees a real leader in Yang, ready to defend this camp. After this, Hans announces that he is leaving the camp for a few days to scout out the situation around him. In the evening, Hans begins to descend along the rooftops towards his house. We see that Hans has equipped his house as a real fortress, impregnable to zombies. He watches as the ditch he dug earlier works perfectly. Hans takes a shower and thinks that tomorrow he will try to find the bandits who took Sari's sister. In the morning, he is already running through the streets of the city and looking for the supposed place where the bandits might be hiding. And now Hans enters the building that Sari was talking about and sees that there really are bandits there. He attacks one of the bandits from behind and quietly eliminates him. Hans then scouts out the situation and sees that there are still bandits on the premises of the building, and he doesn't know how many there might be. Hans sees a hole in the wall in the form of a ventilation hole. He climbs inside and is going to get as much information as possible, and of course finds Sari's sister. Suddenly he notices the gang leader's office downstairs. His name is Boss, and he acts very selfish and arrogant. He interrogates some poor guy and punches him in the stomach. This makes the guy fall to the floor and not get up. The boss tells me to bring him a new girl so that he can play with her and have fun. However, one of his subordinates replies that the girls are already having a bad time and the boss hits him in the face. After this, the boss says that everyone must obey his orders, otherwise he will kill everyone. Next, the boss says that we need to visit the camp at the store to pick up food and medicine from them again. Hans realizes that boss was talking about his camp and decides that this gang must be eliminated. Suddenly, a silhouette of a man appears behind Hans. Hans senses this and turns sharply to repel the enemy's attack. However, the man kicks him in the face and a fight ensues between them. Our hero has trained for many years, so he is not inferior in fighting skills to his opponent. Hans lands his enemy on the floor and begins to beat him with his fists, but he defends himself. The unknown person then kicks Hans in the chest and pushes him back. Hans uses a scorpion kick, and with a deft kick knocks his opponent off balance. After this, Hans takes out his pistol with a silencer and asks the man who he is. The stranger takes off his mask and says that he does not wish harm to Hans. The stranger introduced himself as a man nicknamed the Cleaner, and said that they were on the same side as him. However, Hans does not believe him and is about to shoot. But at that moment the Cleaner jumps down. Hans looks down and sees that the janitor has escaped, but he has been spotted by the gang members. The villains quickly run after Hans because they see him as a threat. A moment later, Hans finds himself surrounded by armed opponents. Hans decides to surrender because he realizes that he doesn't have enough bullets for everyone. In the next scene, Hans and the janitor are kneeling before the boss. We understand that the boss and the janitor were previously acquainted because he punches him in the face. The boss says he told the janitor not to come into the building again. To this, the Cleaner replies that the boss never gave him something and that he came specifically for it. The boss hits the janitor again because he is unhappy that the janitor disobeyed the order not to appear here. The boss then orders Hans to be killed, as he has no use for him. The boss's subordinates show him the pistol with a silencer that they took from Hans. The boss asks our hero where he got the firearm and why he didn't use it against his gang. Hans confidently replies that if he had more bullets, he would have shot all of his subordinates. The boss laughs hysterically at Hans's confident words. The boss says that they also have firearms and even machine guns, so some cute guy is no problem for them. The boss likes Hans's self-confident tone and invites him to join the gang. To this, Hans replies that if he were to become a member of the gang, it would only be as the boss's deputy. The gang leader laughs hysterically again and starts asking where the place is where he got the gun. The boss says this is Hans' last chance to survive. Our hero with red hair says that he got the gun 4 days ago from a gun shop, which is 3 hours away from here, and that there are other weapons there. Hans convinces them that his words are true and that they can find machine guns and pistols for themselves, after which the bandits go to the store for weapons, and Hans and the Cleaner are left with one guard. The guard leaves Hans and the Cleaner alone because he wanted to go to the toilet. At this point, Hans begins to cut the rope that tied him. The Cleaner looks at this and does not understand who this Hans is and why he acts so confidently. We see that Hans's boot has a special blade. Hans frees himself from the rope and is about to kill the guard with a special wire. Hans climbs onto the ceiling and waits for the guard to return. Hans jumps from the ceiling onto the guard, knocking him over and strangling him. The security guard couldn't do anything because he wasn't prepared for such a situation. Hans takes the guard's radio. In the next scene, we see a gang of bad guys who came to the gun shop indicated by Hans. The boss realizes that Hans has deceived him, and there have been no weapons here for a long time. The boss calls the security guard Hans and the Cleaner on the radio and asks if everything is okay with them, and the voice from the radio station replies that everything is fine with them. The gang returns to their building to find that Hans and the janitor have escaped. Suddenly, boss realizes that Hans might have come to their gang to free the hostages. The boss calls the hostage guard on the radio and asks how they are doing. The hostage guard is a big guy named Steve who has a machine gun. Steve replies that the hostages are under control. At this moment, a voice calls boss on the radio and says that Hans is on the roof of the building. All the gang members go upstairs to find our hero. Next, the bandits find an abandoned radio station. One of the bandits picks her up and says that he will find the bastard Hans and kill him. At that moment, some object flies into the back of his head, killing the bandit. Turning around, everyone sees Hans with axes in his hands. Our hero swings another axe with the aim of killing someone else. With all his might, Hans throws another axe into the crowd of enemies and eliminates another gang member. Hans then runs to a place prepared for battle, where he has more axes hidden. Hans, having no weapons, begins to eliminate one bandit after another using only axes. With centimeter precision, Hans eliminates another bandit. Hans then goes into a melee attack and jumps into the crowd of enemies. While in the air, Hans manages to knock out another bandit with his foot. We see that our hero is surrounded by enemies, but he still hopes to survive and defeat them. Hans begins to be attacked by bandits, and he begins to eliminate the gang. While destroying one after another, our hero looks around and manages to repel attacks from behind. The fight continues, and Hans is not losing yet and manages to destroy about 6 people. We see Boss take out his gun and is about to shoot Hans. However, because he is surrounded by his subordinates, the boss is unable to fire a shot. Hans continues to eliminate one bastard after another. He has no equal in hand-to-hand combat, because in the future he survived for 3 years in such conditions. Hans then notices a rifle lying on the floor and jumps after it. Standing up, Hans takes the safety off his rifle and says that this is the end for all his enemies. The bandits see weapons in Hans's hands and literally wet their pants from fear. Hans pulls the trigger of his rifle and starts shooting all the bandits. However, the boss runs away from the battlefield like a coward, and Hans does not have time to catch up with him. We see that our hero has dealt with all the freaks. Suddenly Hans hears a familiar sound. He comes to the edge of the roof and is horrified. He sees that a huge wave of zombies has approached his building, eager to devour everyone in the building. Hans realizes that he has very little time left. He knows that among these zombies, there must be a mutant who is leading them all. Hans goes down into the building and sees that the zombies have broken through. Hans runs into another room and kicks down the doors. He sees that the guy whom Boss had previously interrogated and beaten was left here. Hans opens this guy's mouth. Hans begins to bring the big guy back to his senses so that he can save him. Hans asks who he is and what his name is and offers to go with him. The guy replies that his name is Jin and he is a good person and that he used to do martial arts. The main character cuts the ropes off Jin and saves him. Hans says that by working as a team, the two of them can survive this difficult situation. Next we see Hans and Jin fighting zombies together. Jin shows off his fighting skills and smashes zombies. He spins his air kicks like a true master of sports. From Jin's blows, zombies fly several meters and fall. Hans is surprised by this skill, and he likes that he now has a great partner. Jin says that Hans can count on Hans's help. At this moment we see the boss standing above and taking aim. The boss hits Hans' torso and wounds him. We understand that Hans is really seriously injured because he is bleeding from the mouth. Hans begins to lose consciousness and passes out. Meanwhile, we are shown the events that take place in Hans's camp. It turns out that a wave of zombies has also attacked Hans' camp, and without his main protector, the people are doomed. People are saved by leaving the main camp area, and Zhang Huang gives people time. Zhang Huang is abandoned by the rest of the people and they run away. However, the zombies penetrate even deeper into the camp, damaging all the barriers. We see that people were not prepared for this, because without Hans, no one was monitoring the situation. A horde of hundreds of zombies enters the camp and begins to devour everyone in their path. People in horror understand that they need to run, since they will not be able to fight against such a number of monsters. Suddenly, a zombie bites one of the girls on the hand. However, a guy saves her and throws the zombie aside. There are too many infected and it is impossible to resist them. All remaining survivors begin to flee to the basement. Luckily, the door to the basement is open and everyone starts running there. Miraculously, the last person manages to close the door behind him. After the zombie attack, we realize that there are about 15 people left in the camp. The girl says that she is feeling dizzy from stress, and the guy who saved her earlier starts to calm her down. The girl feels cared for and is touched by it. Also, another guy feels tired and is being consoled. Suddenly, he turns into a zombie because during the battle with the zombies, he was most likely bitten. Having turned into a zombie, he bites the first person he comes across. At this point, we are shown that the girl who was feeling unwell also turned into a zombie and bit someone on the hand. The situation is taking a very tragic turn. We are shown Hans coming to his senses. He suddenly hits Jin in the face because he doesn't have time to understand where he is. Jin flinches from the blow and says he's a friend. Jin tells Hans that he saved him from the boss and the zombies by dragging him into another room. Hans shows that he has armor, but the bullet was unable to penetrate it, only causing minor damage. At this moment, the guys hear some strange sound and prepare for the worst. The same guy who called himself a cleaner comes into the room. He says that he is ready to fight on Hans and Jin's side because he wants to destroy the gang and the boss. The janitor convinces Hans to take him along because he wants to help and be useful. In the next scene, we see that the janitor actually fights well against the zombies. 3 guys confront a crowd of zombies and come up with a plan to escape from here. Jin also fights with all his strength, and we see that he is indeed a very capable guy with muscles. Hans comes up with a plan to escape this wave of zombies and calls everyone inside. We see 3 guys surrounded by a crowd of zombies. The glass begins to fail and crack under the pressure of the monsters. Suddenly, Hans shoots at another window and tells everyone to run after him. Hans makes a way for himself and his new friends. A group of zombies appears in front of them again, however. The cleaner says that he can handle them alone. Jin and Hans watch as a guy takes out an entire horde of zombies single-handedly. The janitor says he has his own fighting style, and he does it beautifully, energetically, and with taste. Turning around, the janitor says that if you're going to fight zombies, you have to do it cool. The guys deal with all the zombies in this part of the building and decide to leave it through the subway. They go down into the subway and walk with a flashlight. Suddenly, the guys notice some strange silhouette in front of them. The janitor shines a light forward, and we realize that we are about to see one of the mutants for the first time. Shining a light on it, the heroes see a mutant, which Hans calls a locust. Hans tells his new friends that this mutant has fast speed and fights with all 4 limbs. He also has good eyesight and senses movements with his antennae. Hans tells Jin to cover him from behind, and tells the cleaner to shine a flashlight on the locusts. Hans then takes aim and prepares to attack the monster. Hans hits the monster's eyes and antennae right on target, taking away his incredible charm. However, the monster does not die and, moreover, is going to attack in response, because he still has hearing and smell. Hans shoots at the monster, but it still remains very fast. The locust jumps at Hans, but he manages to dodge it. The janitor loses sight of the monster and Hans cannot see it. At the last moment, the cleaner finds the monster with a flashlight and illuminates it. But it is too late. The mutated zombie jumps on Hans and attacks him. Hans ducks and shoots back at the monster. It hits the monster's hand and stops it from swinging its arms. Jin notices another crowd of zombies running from behind. He understands that if he does not protect the rear of his friends, they will die, and rushes into battle. Hans continues to fight against the locusts. The monster also attempts to attack Hans. Our hero doesn't have time to dodge, and at the last moment impales the locust on his knife. The monster falls on Hans and he can't do anything. Suddenly, an axe thrown by the cleaner flies towards Hans. Hans grabs an axe and rips the rest of the head off the locust's shoulders. Hans then jumps to the side to take a more advantageous position. Our main character cuts off the monster's right leg. However, at that moment, the mutated zombie attacks Hans with the last of its strength. Our leader understands that now is the time for him to end this battle. With a powerful blow, he cuts the monster into 2 parts. After this, he takes his machine gun and shoots the crowd of zombies, who by this time had managed to approach from the front. Hans stops shooting and calls the janitor to finish off the rest of the zombies. The cleaner happily runs to fulfill Hans's request, because destroying monsters is his favorite job. Hans watches with pleasure how coolly the cleaner copes with the remains of the zombies. We see our main character reloading his weapon. They fire the entire clip at the remaining zombies, so that they don't have time to use regeneration. The guys remember that they haven't seen Jin for a long time, who was supposed to cover them from the zombies from behind, and they start looking for him. They find him a little further into the tunnels, covered in zombie blood, and we realize that Jin has done his job and was able to protect their rear and stay alive. The Trinity finds an exit from the tunnel, and is about to get to the surface. Hans says they need to hurry since they haven't destroyed the boss. The main character calls these 2 with him to help him finish off the boss, because strong people should stick together, and besides, he was convinced that they can be trusted. We see that our heroes are walking down the street in broad daylight, and there is no danger nearby yet. Hans feels that now is a good time to discuss future plans. He stops and says he needs to ask these 2 guys one question. Before this, the cleaner asks him who he is, and where he got such survival skills, and why he is not afraid to die. Hans replies that he is not afraid to die because he has died before. The guys are surprised by this answer and don't know how to react to it. However, Hans says that he was joking and is simply a very talented person, and that is why he was able to survive all this time. Next, Hans invites the guys to join his camp, which is located nearby. Jin replies that he wanted to continue to survive together, and the cleaner replies the same. Hans tells them that the camp has rules that they must follow, or they will not be able to live with the others. Hans also said that he wants to create an alliance of several camps that will help each other and protect themselves from cannibals. Jin and the janitor had never heard of living people eating each other before, but Hans said that this was exactly the kind of gang they would be defending themselves against in the future. Our main character also warned these 2 that if they ever betrayed him or anyone from the camp, he would kill them. After this, Hans called to follow him. Arriving at the camp, our characters see that the entrance to it is destroyed. Hans begins to worry about the lives of the people in the camp. Upon entering, the group saw zombie corpses, and everyone realized that the monsters had broken through the fences due to a zombie wave that night. At this moment, some silhouette starts running towards Hans. As he ran closer, he saw the familiar face of the woman who lived in the camp. For a second, Hans thinks and remembers who she was. He remembered that she had 3 children, and that she did everything to protect them. However, Hans has no choice but to eliminate her. We see Hans' serious face, and one can only imagine the pain he is experiencing now. Hans tells the others that they need to find survivors from the camp and go inside. Hans knocks down the doors leading down. They walk down the stairs and suddenly start hearing some strange sounds. Hans looks in horror at someone's silhouette in the darkness, and realizes that it is most likely his friend from the camp who has become a zombie. he asks Jin to shine a light into the darkness. We see that it is a young girl from the camp who is eating a human corpse. The cleaner wanted to deal with her, but Jin stopped him, saying that it was Hans's personal business. Silently, the main character goes down to her and understands what he must do now. He eliminates another former member of the camp. Then our heroes go inside and see that the losses do not end there. Hans runs to the door leading to the utility room and opens it. At this moment, Hans hopes that there might be another survivor hiding here. And indeed, about 15 people from the camp who managed to survive here were hiding in the room all this time. Hans says that the area is cleared and we can safely leave. Hans tells everyone what happened to him over the past 24 hours, and they also tell him about the events that took place in the camp. The main character introduces new guys to the camp. Next, Hans and Jin clear the rooftop area of zombies. They check every room to make sure there is not a single monster left on the campgrounds. When Hans starts to open the doors, he hears some strange sounds coming from there. The next second, the charming Siri appears before him. She is so happy to see Hans that she rushes at him and hugs him. She cries because she thought she would never see our main character again. There is a cleaner standing behind him, pointing with his finger that the girl is very beautiful. Siri, out of jealousy, begins to ask who the girl is with him. But Hans replies that it is a guy and his nickname is the cleaner. The next moment, another person comes out of the room. We see that it is Yonghwan and he says that Hans is late. Hans replies that he is incredibly happy to see him as a human and not a zombie. Hans praises the two of them for being smart and surviving, unlike half the camp. Hans then announces to everyone that from now on the camp will be divided into several groups. Some squads will be searching for supplies, others will be repelling zombie attacks, and others will be preparing food and sewing clothes. Hans says that the search party will consist of him, the janitor, and Jin. Siri replies that she also wants to join the search party to find her sister. However, Hans refuses her, citing the fact that she will be the weak link. However, Jin says that if they find surviving girls, they will never go with a group that is all guys. Siri realizes that Hans has no choice but to take her with him. Hans then instructs Yonghwan on how to behave in his absence, namely to always be prepared and not to relax. Hans says he is going to find Siri's sister. And so the new detachment, now called the Search Group, sets out on reconnaissance. Jean copes with his task of destroying zombies. Overall, the entire group, consisting of our 4 characters, looks very combat ready. Our heroes have found food and are now going to take it to the camp. Jin screams that there is someone behind Hans. He turns around and sees a zombie running towards him. Hans takes out his sword and is about to finish off the monster. However, Siri screams that it is her sister. And indeed, we see a zombie who looks very similar to Siri, even in her hair color. Hans tells Siri to kill her sister because she has become a monster. He holds her by the hair and gives the girl the opportunity to do it. At first, Siri says that she can't kill her own sister, but Hans tells her to be strong. After this, Siri eliminates her sister. The girl cries because this was the last person close to her. But Hans encourages her and says that now she has a new family. The girl gets up and comes to her senses. She says words of gratitude to Hans. Hans then hands out radios to everyone and says that this way they can maintain contact. In the next scene, we see that our heroes have found a clothing store and updated their appearance. Now they look incredibly cool. Next, Hans plans to search the nearby hospital with his search party. He says that it would be advisable for them to find a doctor or nurse for the camp's needs and make friends with them. We see that our group has already arrived at the hospital. Once inside, they discover zombie corpses, and Hans realizes that there may be survivors here. Our search party is able to find good survivors for the first time, and they are ready to continue searching for them. Hans approaches a locked door and assumes there may be survivors behind it. He shoots at the ceiling to get the door opened for him. A girl's voice was actually heard behind the door, asking them to leave. Hans is happy about this. Siri is surprised that Hans figured out where the survivors might be hiding. Hans then loudly says that he will leave food at the door. That's exactly what he did, leaving bacon, cookies, and soda at the door. A few minutes later, the door opened a little, and we saw that the girl wanted to see the situation. She sees that they really left her some food, as they said. A girl in a medical gown looks around and wants to take the food. However, at that moment, Hans comes out and she tries to stab him with a knife, but he knocks it out. The girl looks up and sees a tall, muscular guy with red hair in front of her. She is afraid of him and thinks that now he will harm her. Hans looks around the room and sees that there are traces of a group of people there. He asks the girl where the others are. However, the girl is afraid of him and does not tell him anything. Hans explains to her that he does not intend to harm her in any way and wants to be friends. Hans calls Sari and asks her to bring her food for this girl. The nurse is very surprised that there is a girl in this group and that she will now be fed. In the next scene, we see that the girl was given food. Hans asks where the rest of her group is. The nurse replies that they are close. Suddenly, we see a dark silhouette of a man behind Hans, swinging a bat at him. Siri manages to warn Hans about the danger lurking behind him literally half a second before the tragedy. With a sharp blow of the pistol handle, Hans warns of the impending danger and pushes the attacker away. The man falls to the ground from a strong blow from the main character, and we see a group of people consisting of 5 people who are surprised by what happened. Hans tells the attacking man to thank fate because he had a gun in his hands, and not his favorite blade, which would have finished off the attacker in an instant. The man who attacked Hans, lying on the floor, asks our characters to leave this place, since this is their own camp, and they do not intend to contact anyone. The stranger said that his name was Tom, and they perceive everyone who comes here as bandits and murderers, because they already had such a case. Hans says that he and his group came to this place to find supplies and survivors, after which they offer the survivors to form an alliance and cooperate. Hans asks the strangers, despite the fact that they attacked him, if they would like to form an alliance with his camp to survive together, share resources and help each other. These people were very surprised by Hans's proposal, since they had only known each other for a few minutes, and had never met anyone as friendly as him before. The doctor then says that they do not want to contact anyone because they are afraid, because 3 days ago a terrible incident happened, after which they do not trust anyone and are going to leave this place. The doctor approaches the window opposite our heroes and is going to show them something. The doctor opens the curtains, and our characters see a sign on the window that was written in blood by some bandits, after which the doctor begins to tell what exactly happened. He says that about 3 days ago they were sitting quietly in their camp and wondering how they would find food, as they were already starting to starve without food. Suddenly they heard the sound of motorcycles outside the window and some shouts. They opened the window and saw a couple running through the streets of the city, consisting of a young girl and a young guy, who were apparently running away from some kind of danger. However, they were not running from zombies or monsters, but from evil people who had a terrible appearance and rode motorcycles. That gang had weapons of bats and sticks, and their number was about 20 people. They saw that the bandits had caught up with the young people and beaten them up badly for fun, all the while smiling and laughing as if it brought them nothing but pleasure. After this, the bandit tied the young man to a motorcycle and dragged him down the street, thereby killing him. At that moment, the camp closed the curtains so as not to see all the horror that was happening on the streets, and also so that the bandits would not see their camp. The camp members could not help those young people because they did not have the weapons or strength to do so. So they continued to just sit and be afraid. Suddenly they heard some noise in the window, and with great fear the man decided to open the curtains and see what was going on there. Opening the curtain, he saw the crazy face of the bandit, who looked at them and said that now they know where there are more people so that they can play with them later. After this, an inscription appeared on the window, which the bandits made with the remains and blood of a young guy whom they had just killed in front of the camp. Hans, after hearing this story, says that if this camp joins their alliance, he will provide them with food and protection from these evil people. In exchange, they will follow the rules he sets and cooperate. Hans hands the man a radio that they will use to communicate and interact between the camps. The man is surprised by such kindness of Hans, and does not believe that at the present time there are still normal guys left on Earth. However, they begin to negotiate cooperation, and the camp they found accepts Hans's offer to form an alliance with his camp. At this point, Hans sets another condition for cooperation, namely that their doctor must go with them to live in the main camp, since there are more people there and they need the help of a doctor. The men don't want to give up the doctor because he is their leader and their hope for medical protection in case of any injuries. The doctor says he agrees to move to the new camp on the condition that his people are provided with protection, including the fact that there are many zombies in this building that need help to deal with. Tom says that they don't have weapons, so they still haven't been able to clear the hospital territory of monsters. And that's why every second they are in danger not only from those bandits, but also from the zombies outside the door. Hans turns around and asks Sari to open the door leading to a hallway where a large group of zombies are located. The camp members scream in horror and ask not to do this, as they will not be able to cope with such a danger, and everyone in this room will die and be eaten. Sari slowly opens the door, behind which strange sounds are heard, and the camp members begin to hide in hopes of avoiding the emerging danger. However, they are faced with a view of a mountain of zombie corpses that the janitor and Jin had built while Hans was talking to the survivors. The cleaner says that Hans was in a hurry to open the door because they wanted to make a real surprise and build a whole tower or a beautiful large statue out of the zombie corpses. Hans tells the camp members that his camp members are very prepared, strong, and fearless people who are able to take care of not only themselves, but also other survivors. He introduces his search party to his new acquaintances, and people see that this is indeed an incredibly confident, equipped, and prepared group of adventurers who have the most serious intentions, and Hans says that now they will clear the hospital territory from zombies. The people from the new camp are shocked by what they saw and still cannot fully believe that these 4 people are capable of clearing their large building of monsters without even applying maximum effort. Next, we are shown that Hans's squad has moved into the hospital corridors to clear the area of zombies, which they are doing quite well, but too slowly, since the zombies are in the patients' rooms. Hans comes up with a way to speed up this process and shoots a pistol at the ceiling to attract monsters to the noise from the shot. As usual, the zombies react to loud noise and begin to emerge from their chambers directly into the hands of our cleanup squad. Hans, maintaining his usual composure, destroys one zombie after another, just like his comrades. Next, our characters go straight down the corridors and find a door that is closed by members of the camp with various mops and sticks, and they conclude that there are even more zombies behind this door. Hans says that they can't leave it like this and that the entire hospital area needs to be cleared, so they open the locked door. At this moment, a huge crowd of angry and aggressive zombies, who are very hungry and have already partially rotted from not having eaten anyone for a very long time, jumps on our characters from the open room. One of these zombies jumps on the cleaner, and he notices the danger only at the very last moment, when it is too late to dodge the bite. Hans yells at the janitor to duck down and kills the zombie, attacking the janitor with a precise shot to the head. However, after Hans's second shot, more zombies start to emerge from the chambers, thus locking our characters in a bad situation, since now they have no escape route. Meanwhile, the members of the new camp fight off zombies at the entrance to the room where they live, as Hans ordered them to provide protection from behind and gave them weapons to do so. Tom says that while Hans and his squad are clearing the main area of the hospital, they should guard the stairs they climbed and the rear. Next, we see our squad breaking through a crowd of zombies, destroying anyone who gets in their way. The cleaner displays particular fury and dexterity, whose axe eliminates any monster it touches. We see that Hans's squad managed to clear the hospital's Aspen territory of zombies, and now its inhabitants are safe and can exist in peace. Hans and his squad return to their new acquaintances and say that almost the entire territory is cleared and they will no longer worry about their lives. Hans then says that they will now return to their main camp taking the doctor, but will return here tomorrow with new food, clothing, and other necessary resources. During this time, Hans leaves all the food they took with them as a guarantee that his squad will return. Tom thanks Hans for his help and cooperation and realizes that the hospital camp was actually very lucky this time to have been found by such good people. The doctor takes with him medicines, drugs, and various medical devices to supply Hans's main camp, and our characters are about to set out. Suddenly, Hans is called by the main camp on the radio and is informed that military personnel have arrived at the camp, demanding that some of the camp's food products be transferred to them to support the active army. Hans is very surprised that firstly, after so much time, there is still an army left in their city, and secondly, that these people are so brazen as to take food from ordinary people. Hans says that they urgently need to move to the main camp, and that no food should be given to anyone until he arrives. Hans's detachment, together with the doctor, set out for the main camp, which was about a 15-minute walk away. Suddenly, Hans fires a pistol into the air, attracting the attention of a huge crowd of zombies located nearby. All the people are again surprised at how Hans is acting and say that he has just put them in great danger. Hans says he has a plan for what to do next and tells everyone to run to the main camp. All members of the squad except Hans flee to the base camp, leaving Hans alone, as that is what he said to do. We understand that Hans has come up with his next plan, with the help of which he will deal with the new threat to his camp. Just a few seconds later, he is surrounded by a huge crowd of zombies, which he lured by shooting into the air. After this, the main character also starts running to the main camp, but by a different route. In the next scene, we see the military standing near the food warehouse, waiting for Hans to arrive, as the people refuse to share their food in his absence. A few minutes later, a sweaty Hans approaches them, apparently having been running all this time to come up with his plan to resolve the situation. The soldiers introduce themselves to him and say that they are soldiers of the city's active army, and that they are hungry and demand that Hans's camp share food at any cost. Hans says they will share food if they answer a few of his questions. First, Hans asked which unit these soldiers belonged to and where their superiors were. This question put the commander of the soldiers, named Jim, in an awkward position. From his appearance, Hans understands that these soldiers have not communicated with their leadership for a long time, which is most likely no longer alive, and that now they are on their own, and most likely do not obey anyone. Next, Hans is about to ask his second question and looks at the weapons these soldiers are wearing. In particular, Hans looks at the rifle that the soldiers have and wonders if they have cartridges for them. Suddenly, Hans tells the soldiers that he knows they don't have a single bullet, and that his unit, unlike them, is fully armed. This frightens the soldiers' commander, Jim, because he realizes that they actually do not have a single live round of ammunition with them. The situation escalates, and members of Hans's camp point their guns at the soldiers, who also point their rifles at our characters. However, Hans says he is willing to share the food because he respects the soldiers' service and wants to support them in this way. Jim is surprised by Hans's decision, because, in his opinion, these people from the camp could easily finish off his squad and take their rifles and everything they have with them. Hans says he wants to know the answer to his last question, namely, where the army's ammunition depot is located. The soldier says he cannot answer this question because they have state secrets and information about the location of this warehouse is a guarded secret. Hans accepts this answer and asks how much food the soldiers want to take with them. To this, Jim replies that they will take half of all the food that is in Hans's camp. The people in the camp start to get upset about this, and one of the soldiers tells everyone to shut their mouths and stop being unhappy. Siri says that soldiers should be grateful for the people helping them, and that soldiers should treat these people with respect. However, the soldier did not like Siri's answer, and he approaches her and says that he will now shut her mouth by force, and that she should sit silently in the corner while the men talk. With one movement of his hand, Hans calmly and confidently squeezes the face of the impudent soldier and tells him to calm down, otherwise he will drive all the soldiers out of the camp and will not give them even one bag of food. The soldier's superior, Jim, orders the brash sergeant to calm down and step back, because he is indeed behaving very brazenly. However, people still don't understand why Hans just gives the soldiers half of all the food supplies, because food is very important for the camp now, especially considering the fact that they found new survivors. Hans says to trust him and not interfere with the implementation of his plan. People fall silent and understand that if Hans said that he had a plan, that everything would be fine, and that they needed to follow it. The soldiers begin to collect food supplies and prepare them for transportation, as they arrived here in a car that they left near the store. The leader of the detachment of soldiers thanks Hans for his cooperation, and, having taken the half of the food he promised, the soldiers go outside. At this time, Hans calls the cleaner to him and says that there is a special and very important task for him. The cleaner understands that if Hans has such an expression on his face, it means he is planning something really insidious. We see the soldiers, having taken the food supplies, walking towards their truck, which was left near the store. They are happy that they managed to get food supplies, and that now they have about a week until they run out again and they have time to find more food. Suddenly, the military sees that in the place where they left the car, there is a huge crowd of zombies that has blocked the way, and they will not pass by them. The soldiers are very surprised by this, because when they arrived there a few hours ago, there were no zombies nearby, and everything was clean in this area. Soldiers begin to leave half of the food they take so that they can move faster and have a chance to survive. However, one zombie notices the sergeant and attacks him, and the soldier is forced to use force, creating noise in the process. The sound of the fight attracts the attention of several zombies who are standing at the edge of the crowd, and they look towards the soldiers. We see that a chain reaction has started, and now the entire crowd of zombies notices the soldiers and heads towards them to taste the meat from the military. The first one they come across is Private Clinton, who after numerous bites from the monsters will also turn into a zombie in a few minutes and join their crowd, of course, if there is anything left of him. The leader of the soldiers shouts to retreat, as they have no ammunition to resist the crowd of zombies, and this crowd is too big and can easily kill them. The soldiers take the food and run back to the store where Hans's camp is located, as this is their last chance to survive. In the background, we see the last seconds of an army private named Clint, who begs to be saved, but we realize it is too late to do so. The soldiers are horrified by this picture and throw food on the ground in the hope that they can run faster and save themselves from certain death. However, the soldiers on the rescue route see an obstacle in the form of trucks and understand that their path is cut off, and they will all soon die. At that moment, a volley of homemade slingshots made by members of Hans's camp is fired from the roof of the trucks into the crowd of zombies. The soldiers froze in anticipation of a miracle, and they began to hope that they would be saved by these people from the fate of being eaten by zombies. They see the silhouette of Hans and his squad on the roof of the truck, who says that he can save the soldiers, but to do so, they will have to fulfill several conditions. The soldiers are happy about this and say that they will do anything to survive in this incredibly difficult situation. Before this, Hans expresses his dissatisfaction with the fact that the soldiers left half of the food they gave them because it was very valuable. Jim apologizes to Hans for this decision, but explains that if they had not left the food, they would have died because they ran slowly with the boxes. Hans forgives them for the loss of food and says that in order to be saved, the soldiers will have to show him on the map where the army's ammunition and grenade depot is. Otherwise, he will not save them. Hans shows his pistol to the soldiers, showing that his camp is armed and will be able to save them if the soldiers agree to the condition. We see a huge wave of zombies approaching from behind the military, and they have only seconds left to give their answer. The soldiers look at our character's squad and realize that these people, led by Hans, are an incredibly strong and determined community that is capable of fighting back against any threat. The squad leader, Jim, agrees to Hans's conditions to show where the ammunition depot is in exchange for saving his life and the lives of his comrades. Hans descends from the barrier towards the soldiers along with the cleaner and Jin and begins clearing the area. The janitor, in his usual manner, takes on the right side of the crowd, chopping up all the zombies with an axe and making jokes while doing so. A calmer Jin takes over the left flank and deals with the monsters on his part of the territory, leaving them no chance due to his mastery of martial arts. The military are stunned by the skill and passion with which these two literally wipe out a crowd of terrible zombies in minutes and cannot believe their eyes, because in comparison to them, they seem like harmless boys. Hans, with a smile on his face, as if nothing had happened, approaches Jim and asks him to show him on the map the location of the ammunition depot he needed, as they had agreed to save their lives. The soldiers mark the location of the army depot on the map and ask to be allowed to leave, giving them at least some food. Hans says that he will only let the soldiers go if they leave all their weapons behind, and, what's more, he will now only give them 25% of the food he gave them initially. The military is shocked by this decision and asks why he is taking away their weapons and why he is giving them so little food to take with them. Hans says that this is the price for saving them and punishment for the impudence they showed when they came to the camp of ordinary people and thought that they would take food for free. The soldiers realize that in this situation they have no choice, and Hans had calculated everything too well. So they give all the weapons they have to the people from our main character's camp. Next, Hans talks to Jin and the cleaner, and now they understand what exactly the protagonist's plan was. Hans asks Yong Huan to increase vigilance on the borders of their territory, so that no one, including a military man, enters the camp without our main character's knowledge. And Hans also says that he brought a doctor to the camp. After this, he calls a girl from the camp and tells her to cook something very tasty to eat and feed the doctor, and also to give her the opportunity to rest. The girl perceives Hans's instructions as a particularly important mission, and declares with full responsibility that she will cope with the task. Hans shows the camp to the doctor, and says that very soon they will equip him with a medical facility in which he could work normally. The doctor thanks Hans for such kindness, and says that he likes this place, and will make a positive contribution to its development. A few minutes later, Hans leads a clearing party to make room for the military to retreat. He is met by a crowd of zombies who in the meantime are finishing off the remains of one of the soldiers, whom they managed to bite first. Hans, keeping an impartial expression on his face, walks towards danger, preparing his pistol for battle. A precise shot to the head, and the first of the crowd of zombies falls to the ground, thereby attracting the attention of the rest of the crowd. We see that the zombies heard a loud sound, move away from the borders of the camp and go further away from Hans. The soldiers leave the camp and wonder where the monsters have gone, because an hour ago there were about 100 of them here. Jin says that he and his squad, on Hans's orders, will escort them to the truck to keep them safe. The road of zombie corpses tells us that Hans led the bulk of the crowd away, allowing the military group and Jin to pass. Jin deals with the rest of the zombie horde without much effort, and leads the group of soldiers to their destination. Approaching the car, Jin sees that all the zombies around it have already been killed, and the area has been cleared of monsters. Hans comes out from behind the car and says that they were walking too slowly, and he cleared the way to the car himself. Siri, as always, is pleasantly impressed by Hans's behavior, and talks about how strong her feelings are for him. The soldiers load the food donated to them into a car, and prepare to leave for their camp. The leader of the squad of soldiers, Jin, thanks Hans for his assistance, and hopes that this is not their last meeting. The soldiers leave, and Sari says that she hasn't seen the cleaner for a long time and doesn't know where he went. Hans tells her to look at the roof of the truck as it drives away. We see that the cleaner has hidden on the roof of this car and is driving along with it unnoticed. Siri asks why this had to be done. Hans replies that this way they will know where this group of soldiers lives and whether they pose a threat to the camp, because if they are dangerous, then Hans will have to eliminate them. The cleaner on the roof of the car thinks that he will cope with the task assigned to him at any cost, since this mission is very important for the camp. Arriving at their camp, the soldiers begin to unload food supplies, and during their conversation we understand that the supplies are needed for the children they are guarding. However, at this moment we are shown that while the soldiers were not in the camp, someone attacked them and killed their comrades. We see that they died not from zombies, but from the atrocities of people, because one of the soldiers was brutally crucified on boards. The cleaner sees all this and understands that the situation here is very bad. He also discovers traces of motorcycles and realizes that this is all the work of the people they heard about earlier. From the inscription on the building's facade, the cleaner understands that the same gang was here as near the hospital. The janitor calls Hans on the radio and reports to him the information he has learned. Hans goes to check the walls of their shop and finds the same inscription written in blood. The main character realizes that this gang of bastards marks the places where people live in order to later return to them and mock people. Hans tells Yong Hwan to strengthen security, set up observation posts, and prepare to repel enemy attacks. Hans is convinced that these bastards will attack them sooner or later, and he will have to defend this camp, even if it means eliminating the entire gang. Hans shows this inscription to the rest of the camp and asks them not to tell other people about it for now. In his head, Hans thinks about the Sole Survivors Alliance, who in the future became the main problem for humanity and caused the death of hundreds of people, and that this gang may be somehow connected to the Alliance. Hans is talking to the newcomers to the camp, namely 3 guys and 1 girl. He notices that one of the newcomers, named Ralph, has a very powerful physical build and large muscles. Hans tells Ralph that he is to join a search party consisting of Jin, Seri, the janitor, and Hans himself, while the rest of the new recruits will be sent to the second camp at the hospital. Ralph says that the other newcomers are his relatives, and he is responsible for their lives, so he does not want to be separated from them. Hans says that it is a 15-minute walk from here to the hospital, and Ralph will be able to see them every day, and Ralph agrees to the protagonist's proposal. However, Hans asks Yong Hwan to keep an eye on all the newcomers and report to him anything interesting. The next day, Hans visits the camp at the hospital and brings them food and new clothes, which the people happily accept. Hans also gives the new camp firearms that he took from the military and ammunition for them. Tom says he thought Hans wouldn't come back, and he's now pleasantly surprised. Next, Hans's search party studies the map on which the soldiers marked the location of the weapons depot and says that they need to get to it. The squad members ask how many weapons they should take from there. To this, Hans replies that they will take absolutely all weapons from there, no matter what they may be. The squad members are not surprised by Hans's answer, but as usual they feel slightly uncomfortable when Hans makes such an expression. A few hours later, we see that Hans and his squad are beginning to survey the immediate area around the hospital in order to secure this new camp as much as possible. Hans finds canned food that someone has recently eaten, and realizes that someone has been watching the hospital camp all this time. Then Hans hears Seri's scream coming from another room. Entering inside, Hans sees the mafia boss who escaped from him a week ago pinned to the wall. Hans realizes that someone else found him and killed him, and now they are really in trouble. Near his 2 camps there is a gang of bastards on motorcycles that urgently needs to be eliminated. Later that night, Hans rests in the main camp, lying on the floor. Suddenly he hears strange sounds and immediately moves towards their source. As he goes down the stairs, he wonders what it could be. Perhaps bandits have infiltrated the camp. However, the source of the noise is a couple of young people who decided to retire from prying eyes in a secluded place. Hans becomes embarrassed and realizes that he's been overly vigilant lately and is about to leave. However, on his way, Yong Hwan appears and asks what is going on. He also saw a young couple and became embarrassed. Hans says that it is better for them to leave the young couple alone and go away. Yong Hwan says he didn't know Hans had a penchant for secretly watching other people kiss. For his stupid words, Yong Hwan gets hit on the head, and our characters go down to their rooms. The next morning we see the new members of Hans's camp actively training and improving their physical fitness. All this takes place under the strict control of our main character. He says that training is over for today and everyone should be ready to go on mission. Meanwhile, we are shown the events taking place in the soldiers' camp, namely, that a surviving child is found there. The soldiers were glad that the children remained alive and that they could find out from them what had happened there in their absence. The children say that on that day a gang of evil men on motorcycles appeared, killed the men, and then began to abuse the women, taking off their clothes. The cleaner reports everything he heard to Hans. Hans calls an emergency meeting to discuss the impending threat, and says that they need to prepare to fight the evil gang. People are asking how they will resist this gang of bastards. Hans replies that they will kill anyone who comes into the camp with bad intentions. The council members agree with Hans and say that they are waiting for instructions from Hans on how to proceed. This surprises our protagonist, because just recently these people were cowards, but today they are a close-knit team. Hans is given a piece of paper with a list of rules for his camp written on it. The man says that these rules were developed by Hans himself, and people wrote them down and will follow him to the end. The remaining members of the camp enter the room and express words of support for Hans. Everyone says that they are waiting for instructions from him, because now Hans is their real leader and protector. The protagonist says that he will develop a plan to protect the two camps, since now every life is very important to him. At night, Hans draws up a defense plan and tries to take into account all the nuances, since there are two camps under his protection. Hans begins to get headaches from constant thoughts about dangers and human lives. He thinks there is a connection between these bastards and the Sole Survivors Alliance, which according to his calculations should already be increasing its strength. Suddenly Hans realizes that the bastards who are writing the graffiti don't have their own camp, so they ride motorcycles, which means that either they're going to take over one of his camps, or they're going to leave the city and possibly join the Sole Survivors Alliance. At this moment, Sari comes to Hans and says that they need to go to dinner. Hans replies that he doesn't want to eat and is busy with work. Siri comes closer and says that Hans needs to rest more and eat food to have strength. Siri squeezes Hans's hand between her breasts and says that if he doesn't go eat, she will stay with him. After this, Hans realizes that he really needs to eat, otherwise Sari will pounce on him. While having dinner on the roof of a store, Hans hears strange sounds coming from the road. He looks through the night vision goggles to get a better look. The protagonist sees the headlights of motorcycles and realizes that the bandits are going to attack one of his camps, so he commands everyone over the radio to take positions. As we can see, the camp in the hospital prepared to repel the attack of the bandits. The main camp in the store has also taken up its positions and is awaiting the enemy's advance. They also blocked the underground passages to the store, setting up people and traps. Hans himself, along with Jin and Zhonghwan, took up a position between the hospital and the store in order to be there faster once we figured out which camp would be attacked first. Hans tells his comrades to kill the enemy without hesitation or regret because they know what horrors this gang commits. Zhonghwan and Jin understood Hans's order and were ready to act. The silence is broken by the sound coming from the radio station. Hansu reports to the camp at the hospital that the gang has attacked them. Hans's squad moves towards the hospital to help their people. Luckily, Hans gave the order to open the door leading to the crowd of zombies that they did not finish off last time. And upon entering the hospital, the gang met zombies, not people. Hans's squad went around the bandits from behind, and the main character hits the first freak with a pinpoint shot. The bandit falls into the hospital room and the others realize that they are trapped between zombies and Hans's squad. The main character's squad suppresses the remaining enemies with machine gun fire. After this, Zhonghwan closes the doors of the hospital, and the characters wonder why there were so few enemies here. Suddenly, Hans is told on the radio that the gang has attacked the main camp. Hans realizes that the attack on the hospital was just a distraction. Hans radios Siri, who is supposed to be on the roof of the store, but she doesn't answer. We see that by this time, Sari has already been attacked. She lies on the ground covered in blood and can't do anything. There's a bastard from this gang sitting above her and telling her that he's going to have a good time with her now. He licks his lips, realizing that he is about to have a lot of fun and that there is no one to help her. Hans realizes that the bandits most likely managed to climb onto the roof of the building using special equipment. Fearing for the lives of his comrades, Hans and his squad move to the main camp to finish off these bastards once and for all. While walking down the street, an arrow flies past Hans's leg, but does not hit him. Hans manages to dodge a volley of arrows from an unknown location at the last moment. However, the arrow hits the leg of Zhonghwan, who is slower than the protagonist. At the moment when they shot at Zhonghwan, the main character managed to see where the shooter was. Hans dodges more arrows and looks for a safe place. Jean helped his friend get to the car and saved him for a while. Hans runs to the car where his friends are sitting under aimed crossbow fire. Hans realizes that the bandits have also taken up their positions and have specifically positioned themselves so that they can attack him. Fireworks are thrown out of the window towards Hans and his friends. A firework falls near Hans and begins to explode, making loud noises. A crowd of zombies hear this sound and begin to move towards the source, and at the same time towards our characters. Hans begins shooting back at the monsters and realizes that due to Zhonghwan's injury and poor position, they are in a very dire situation. Hans asks Jin if he can throw fireworks to the place where the shooting is taking place. Jin replies that he can do it. Hans counts to 3 and suddenly rushes forward, attracting attention and giving Jin the opportunity to throw fireworks through the window. Next, we are shown events that took place half an hour earlier. On the roof of the store, Sari and Ralph stand in their positions. Siri says she heard some suspicious sound from another part of the wall. She goes to check on him because Ralph was afraid to go there. However, Ralph notices that the door to the roof is open, even though they closed it when they moved into position. Turning back, Sari sees that Ralph is lying unconscious, and 2 bandits are standing behind him. One of them says that they are very lucky to have met such a beautiful girl with such a great figure. Siri realizes that she is in a very difficult situation, and she only has a few seconds to make a decision. The girl takes out a revolver with a sharp movement and aims it at her offenders. The bandits were shocked by the girl's behavior because they didn't know that she had a gun. Siri's first shot misses, and the tattooed-faced bandit moves out of the line of fire. The second bandit runs towards the girl with a bat, but for him it turns out to be a mistake. With a precise shot to the chest, the girl stops the insolent man approaching her. However, for a second she loses sight of the tattooed bandit and he knocks her down. Siri lies on the floor and cannot move because the blow to her head was very strong for her. The bastard starts to pull the girl's clothes off, and we understand that something bad is about to happen. Siri begins to resist, but he puts a revolver in her mouth and says that if she does anything again, he will kill her. Siri spreads her legs in front of the bandit and says that he can do whatever he wants with her. The bandit is surprised by this, but continues to undress the girl. Siri hugs the bandit and makes it clear that she is going to kiss him now. From the girl's expression, we understand that this was her plan. With both hands, she grabs the bastard's head and presses her fingers on his eyes. At this moment, she pushes the bandit away from her with a blow of both legs. Rising to her feet, the girl takes out a knife and realizes that now she must decide to commit another murder. Suddenly, she feels pain in her cheek and realizes that she has been shot. Luckily, the bullet only slightly grazed her face and she is alive. The blinded bandit shoots in all directions in the hope of hitting the girl. Siri suddenly rushes forward towards the bandit, wanting to finish him off. However, the bastard manages to grab her and stop our character's attack. He brings the revolver to the girl's head and pulls the trigger. But because he had been shooting before, he ran out of bullets. Having gathered her last strength into a single hole, the girl deals with her offender and puts an end to this battle. Never before had she been so decisive in her actions and confident. She looks at the defeated enemy and thinks that Hans taught her to be like this. At this time, the main character runs towards the bandit, shooting from the window, and gains time. Jin throws a firework towards the bandit and hits the window. However, at that moment, an arrow was already fired towards Hans, which flies at incredible speed. There is a split second left before the arrow hits Hans right in the head. However, time seems to stop around him, and Hans manages to dodge. The arrow misses the main character, and Jin notices this, not understanding how Hans managed to do this. The protagonist shouts at Jin to take Zhonghuan and go to the main camp. Jin follows Hans's orders and takes away the wounded Zhonghuan. At this time, Hans shoots the zombies and attracts the attention of the other monsters, giving his comrades the opportunity to escape. The bulk of the zombies actually run towards the main character. Jin deals with the rest of the zombie horde and heads to the main camp. Hans is in a state of shock from how he dodged the arrow, because as far as he understands, time really did seem to stop. His right hand is shaking, and his inner instinct tells him that he can now predict danger. Sounds are heard from above, and Hans comes to his senses, realizing that he only has to deal with the bandits. A minute later, a group of bandits comes down to kill Hans, but they don't see him. The main character cold-bloodedly shoots the bastards who came out. This is his revenge for all those whose lives they ruined. With the hand of a dead bandit, he closes the entrance doors to prevent zombies from breaking into the building. Hans slowly climbs the stairs and talks about the role he plays in the lives of the people in the camp. He realizes that there are real bastards behind this door, and if he doesn't kill them, they will destroy his camp. His hand trembles, warning him of danger. Suddenly, a zombie appears behind Hans, which our hero notices too late. The monster pounces on the protagonist's back and tries to bite through his armor. Hans knocks out all of the zombie's teeth with an elbow strike, and it flies away. Turning back, the protagonist sees that zombies have broken through the door and a whole crowd is chasing him. He closes the second door in front of them, finding himself in the same room with the bandits. After this, Hans blocks the doors by wrapping the shelves. At this moment, they start shooting at Hans with a crossbow, but he manages to dodge. Hans starts shooting back and hits the first enemy. The main character's intuition tells him that the danger has not yet passed. Another bastard appears to the right of Hans. Hans throws a gun at him and hits him right in the head. The next moment, our character jumps up and kicks the bandit, but he blocks the attack and flies to the side. The bandit does not lose consciousness and gets up to continue fighting. Hans takes out his favorite knife and prepares for the next round of their battle. The bandit asks why Hans doesn't turn into a zombie, because he was just bitten and should become infected. We are shown that Hans's shoulder is actually covered in blood, but it is from zombies. Hans knows very well what it feels like to be bitten by a zombie, and knows that he is lucky this time. Hans asks the bandit how they knew about his movements. The bastard tells him that they found a radio station with the same frequency and eavesdropped on their conversations. Hans blames himself for making such a mistake in transmitting information that almost cost everyone their lives. After this, Hans asks what exactly the bandits are doing in this city. The villain tells him that they are going to join the alliance of rural survivors. What he hears sends Hans into a wild rage and he loses control of himself. He lands blow after blow on this man, leaving him no chance. He angrily beats his enemy and sits on top of him. Hans removes the bandit's mask and discovers the man's identity. In the future, he had already met him when he became the commander of the 4th Punitive Squad of the Rural Survivor Alliance. He was also known by the nickname The Bully. It now becomes clear to Hans that he has influenced events in the present, and the future is beginning to change. He recalls that in the future, the Bully's gang dealt with the local mafia themselves, after which they left and joined the Alliance of Rural Survivors. Due to Hans's disruption of their plans this time, they were delayed in this city for several days, and now he has the opportunity to deprive the Alliance of a potential recruit. Hans recalls that in the future, the Bully, after joining the Alliance, became famous for his cruelty and craving for bullying people. The Bully killed everyone in a row, sparing neither girls nor children, and now he is in the hands of our main character, who, by killing him, can save thousands of lives. Hans doesn't hold back his emotions and continues to beat the bastard. The main character also remembers a situation from the future, when a bully threw one guy into a crowd of zombies and undressed his girlfriend in front of his eyes. These memories make Hans even more furious, and he reaches for the knife. However, the bully does not give up and hits our character with his head. After this, he grabs Hans by the head and slams him on the floor. However, it was too late, because Hans had switched to the mode of an Avenger who felt no pain. He knocks away the bully's hand and jumps to the side. The protagonist grabs a knife, but the bully starts running towards the window, realizing that he won't defeat Hans in an equal fight. The enemy jumps out the window in the hope of escaping punishment in the form of our main character. Hans thinks in his head that his mission today is to catch up and finish off the bastard. He jumps out of the window after the bully. Hans sees where the bastard ran and starts chasing him. Along the way, Hans deals with all the creatures that stand in his way. Both guys run into the courtyards of residential buildings and are left alone with each other. Suddenly, a bully with a stick in his hands attacks Hans from around the corner. The bastard hits our main character on the head with a stick, but he doesn't even move from the blow. The bandit froze in horror, not understanding why Hans didn't even blink from his blow. With a deft twist of his hand, Hans grips the handle and begins to act. He stabs his bully with a knife while remaining calm and cool. We see that Hans has cut off the bastard's ear, and he is screaming from the pain piercing his head. Hans slams his bully's head into the wall, and he passes out unconscious. After this, Hans throws the bastard into the crowd of zombies pursuing them, who have not eaten anything for a very long time. Hans watches as the monsters greedily take apart the bully's body and eat it. And after a few minutes, only memories remain of the bully. Meanwhile, Jin and the others climb onto the roof of the store and find Sari among the corpses of the attackers. She says that her life is not in danger, but Ralph still has not regained consciousness. We see that after a few hours, the doctor had already provided everyone with the necessary medical care, especially Zhonghhuan. Sari asks where Hans is now, since no one has seen him for a long time. Jin talks about what happened and says that he also hasn't seen Hans for a long time and doesn't know where he might be. Sari takes out a radio and tries to call Hans, but no one answers. Next, the doctor gives Sari an injection to stop possible blood poisoning. Night falls and Sari falls asleep due to stress and her fatigue. Jin thinks that Hans might be in danger somewhere, and at the moment only he can help him. Realizing his and his fellow comrades' duty to Hans, Jin decides to go alone into the unknown and find his friend. At this moment, Hans, somewhere out there in the courtyards of residential buildings, is trying to escape alone from the bloodthirsty crowd of monsters, so furiously trying to reach him. Being at a sufficient height, Hans assesses the number of monsters and understands that his current situation is very dire, and he has no plan on how to get out. We are shown how bad things are, and the scale of the problem really hits us. Hans is holding onto a thin pipe along the wall, which seems like it will soon give way and treacherously break. Hans holds onto the pipe with one hand and uses the other to cut off the hands of the zombies that reach out to grab him. Hans watches the sunrise and feels calm, and reflects that the second chance fate gave him was not in vain, and that he did enough to save many people, although he does not want to die. Suddenly Hans hears people screaming in a familiar voice. It was the voice of Kang Hyuk, who is the brother of Kang Kong, whose arm was cut off by Hans, and who died of blood poisoning a few weeks ago. Kang Hyuk did not come alone, but with a group of young people. He left a few weeks ago to bury his brother near his parents' house, and apparently he succeeded, and also managed to find new survivors. Hans thinks that fate has given him a third chance to do as much as possible for people and minimize the consequences of the apocalypse. We see that some time has passed, and Hans begins to come to his senses. He lies in a room in the main camp, and Sari lies on her knees next to him. Hans came to his senses and began to rise up in bed. This is noticed by Sari, who fell asleep while waiting for him. The girl hugs Hans and thanks God that he is still alive. She says how much she missed him and worried about him. And Hans says that he did everything he could to get back to camp. The people crowded at the entrance to Hans's chamber to see their leader and chief. There is a man standing at the entrance to the ward and not letting anyone in, as he wants to keep Hans calm. A girl shouts from the crowd and says that she has prepared a delicious tomorrow for Hans. The man takes the delicious food and says that he will give it to Hans, but he will not let her inside. Hans remembers what happened and that he managed to kill the bully. Hans's closest comrades enter the room and greet him. Hans asks how long he slept, as he feels refreshed and rested. The guys tell him that he slept for 2 days. The doctor says that Hans's condition is not in danger and that no one died in the bandits' attack. Hans is very happy that all the camp members were saved and that everything went well. After this, Hans says that there is no time to relax and it is time to get back to work. The people around him think what kind of monster Hans is, who even after such events cannot rest himself and let other people rest. Siri yells at Hans because he hasn't had enough rest and needs to gain strength to continue managing the camps. Hans recalls that the military camp had problems and that it was urgent to resolve the issue of forming a camp for the children and the military personnel who guarded them. However, he is reassured by the cleaner, who says that he brought the children and soldiers to their camp. He says that they are all safe now, and that a third camp will be formed on the school grounds where they lived, which will belong to Hans' alliance. The man tells Hans that while he was sleeping, they shared food and other resources with the soldiers and children. After which, he wrote everything down, and Hans will be able to read all the information. Hans was pleasantly surprised that while he was away, the camp members were able to organize themselves and do everything right and work as a team. After this, Hans asks to call Kang Hyuk to him to ask him about how he survived while burying his brother. Kang Hyuk comes to Hans's room and tells him about the events that happened to him. He says that he buried his brother near his parents' house and met his 3 classmates there, with whom he had been friends before the apocalypse. And when he returned to the camp, they saw Hans in need of help and helped him. After talking with Kang Hyuk, Jin comes to Hans and says that he also has something to tell. Jin tells Hans that the soldiers returned with the cleaner to the main camp and told him strange things about the cleaner. The cleaner, returning to the camp, was covered in blood and had a very strange appearance. When the soldiers were asked what had happened, they fearfully told them that on their way back to the main camp they had met a small group of people on motorcycles who were members of the gang. At that moment, the cleaner, knowing what horrors that gang had committed, single-handedly dealt with those people in a fit of rage. According to the soldiers, the cleaner looked like a real devil and his condition was worrying. Hans remembers the moment when a janitor dodged his shot at the mafia building and thinks that maybe he is not an easy person. Next, Jin asks Hans with a serious face how he managed to dodge that arrow on the night of the gang's attack. Jin says he watched from the sidelines, and it seemed to him that Hans had slowed down time in an incredible way. Jin doesn't understand how an ordinary person could do this and asks to explain it. However, a second later, Jin taps Hans on the shoulder and says that he understands that these two are just very clever guys and nothing more. Hans says words of gratitude, but in his head he thinks that in reality, that situation with the arrow was not simple, but something more mysterious for him. Hans calls the janitor into his room to ask how he managed to single-handedly repel the gang's attack on the military. The cleaner tells in his usual manner how he fought and defeated everyone without much effort. The cleaner says that there are now 3 camps in Hans' alliance, and they need to build a clear system to manage them. Hans is thinking about how he can manage the alliance because there are so many people. Hans is developing the structure of his alliance. According to its structure, the most important one will be a search group of 16 people, which will include the best fighters, divided into 2 teams. The main camp will have 11 permanent residents. The hospital camp will have 12 residents, and the military camp will have 23 residents. Hans realizes that there is no more time to waste, and he needs to get to work. He puts on his gear and prepares for a hard day. Hans says that now the search party will move forward with him to form a 4th temporary camp, which will serve as a transit point in various situations. Siri is again unhappy that Hans has not rested, and has already started hard work. Hans says that today they will visit a place that he previously kept a big secret. The guys ask what this secret place is and how far it is. To this, Hans replies that they will see him very soon. Hans then escorts the soldiers back to their camp, which is located in the school. They discuss the terms of cooperation and how the issue of interaction will be resolved. The military says that they agree to join Han's alliance, but if the leadership of their army appears, they will return back to the military structure. Thus, the guys agree to cooperate, and the soldiers leave for the camp, taking the radio station. Several hours later, a search party in 2 trucks sets out for the location Hans is leading them to. After landing on the street, Hans tells everyone to follow him. We get a view of Hans's hideout, and we realize that he is leading his search party to his own home. Hans tells everyone to be prepared for danger, as he personally set traps in this place. In particular, Hans says that he has dug holes for zombies all over the place. We also see that Hans has stretched out a fishing line in the area, onto which he has applied glass powder. Having dealt with the zombies in the area, the guys come to the courtyard of Hans' house. Everyone sees a huge, expensive house and doesn't understand what they are doing here. Hans takes everyone inside, and everyone is surprised, as the house is fully equipped with everything necessary. Inside the house, there are huge supplies of various food and products. Hans also shows that he has hot water. Siri is the first to take a shower and is very happy that she can finally wash her face and bring her appearance to perfect condition. Hans is embarrassed because he is also pleased that the girl can tidy herself up. At this point, Hans notices that the janitor and new military member of the squad is looking for something on the laptop. The cleaner says they want to find out what kind of girls. Hans looks at the laptop. Hans realizes that these guys are just 2 idiots. However, at that moment, Young Hwan comes up and says that he saw Hans watching 2 young men kissing in the store. Hans is furious at such stupidity and shouts at the 3 fools. Evening comes and everyone gathers together to have dinner and discuss business. There is fried meat and a lot of food on the table. People haven't seen such delicious food for a long time and are looking forward to the time when they can eat it all. Hans says that people should not deny themselves anything and eat as much as they want. Everyone thanks Hans for such kindness. An hour later, we see everyone having a good and calm time together. The girls finally tidy themselves up, wash themselves, and do their hair. Siri finds a mobile phone and takes a video and asks Hans to say a few words on camera. Hans turns around and announces that he actually has something to say to everyone in his camp. Hans stands in the middle of the room and begins to speak, and everyone freezes in attention. Hans thanks everyone who works for the benefit of the Alliance and makes a positive contribution. Everyone starts listening closely to what Hans says. Even his closest comrades in arms listen to the main character. Hans says that this room contains the bravest and most courageous people from all 3 camps, who risk their lives every day for the good of others, and they will be rewarded. One of the men in the squad asks what award Hans is talking about. The main character states that everyone who is in the search party and risks their lives will have priority for the Alliance members, eat the best food, and the rest of the people should listen to them. Hans says this is a new rule for all 3 camps of the Alliance. In his head, Hans thinks that until he knows that they can all be trusted completely, he won't tell anyone about his second hideout, which is outside the city. Next, Hans is asked how he was able to prepare so well for the apocalypse, collect so much food, weapons, and master combat skills. Hans replies that he is a messenger of God, who has already lived through all these horrors and died in the future. But God brought him back to prevent the apocalypse. All people are completely surprised by what they hear. However, Hans says he was joking, and everyone exhales from the tension. Hans asks Siri to show this video to all the other camps later. After this, the main character asks everyone to have a good rest, since tomorrow they will go on a mission where they must pick up ammunition from a military warehouse. Hans himself goes to sleep alone. The next morning, Hans's squad begins preparing for the mission. Hans calls all 3 camps on the radio and asks them to report to him on the situation. Hans is informed over the radio that all 3 camps are normal and that no incidents have occurred overnight. The squad arrives at an army ammunition depot and sees through binoculars that there are a lot of zombies there. Hans says that the number of zombies near the warehouse is too high and it looks like there was once a zombie wave here. He says that the army unit that was based here was defeated by a wave of zombies and apparently no one could survive in such a situation. After observing, Hans draws a diagram and asks everyone to copy it into their notebooks. Hans makes a plan where the squad will split into 3 groups, and he and the first group will go to the warehouse to get some ammo. The second group will go to the barracks to get ammo and supplies, and the third group will cover them. A few minutes later, Hans' first group enters the army warehouse, and the protagonist breaks down the door. Going inside, the soldier tells him that this warehouse is very large, since it used to contain ammunition for several army units. Hans is glad that they are so lucky, as the number of weapons here is colossal. Hans recalls that in the future he lived in earlier. He was also part of an army group until it disbanded. The first group has finished getting the necessary supplies, and they are going to rest while the others finish. Hans and the soldier sit down and talk. during which Hans reveals that before the apocalypse, he served in a special forces unit in the army. Then Hans is called on the radio and told that there is a problem. Hans's group arrives at the second group, which was taking ammunition from the barracks. They show him that there are a large number of zombies near the barracks, through which they will not be able to break through. Hans throws a grenade into the air. The grenade explodes on the ground, making an explosive sound. The zombies hear the sound and react to it as usual and move towards the noise. Hans says that the approach to the barracks is now clear, and they can pass. Approaching the barracks, they open the doors and smell an incredible stench. Everyone is amazed at what they see inside the barracks. They see 3 soldiers who look like zombies. Coming closer, they see that these are not zombies, but simply starving soldiers. Hans asks what happened here. The soldiers say that a wave of zombies has arrived and they are trapped here. Hans wants to open the doors in the barracks and asks what is behind them. The soldier asks not to open the door because there is a toilet there. However, Hans decides to see what is behind that door and opens it. A zombie soldier pounces on him. Hans stops him with a well-aimed pistol shot. Hans then points his gun at the surviving soldiers and says that he realized that they were eating their comrade out of hunger. However, Hansa is stopped by Kong Hyuk and asked not to kill the surviving soldiers. Hans says that these are no longer simple people, but cannibals, and they will not be able to live without tasting human flesh. Kang Hyuk asks to give these people a chance and still not kill them. Hans knocks down Kang Hyuk so that he won't interfere with him doing what he has planned. Kang Hyuk falls to the ground and 3 shots ring out in the air. We see that Hans did what he had to do. Kang Hyuk asks Hans why he did this. Hans replies that it was the only choice, even if it was difficult. Hans says that this world requires determination and fearlessness, and if Kang Hyuk does not want to become part of the new world, then he should leave the camp. Everyone froze when Hans spoke and did not dare interrupt him. Hans said that as a leader, he bears the burden of responsibility for the lives of all the people in the camp, and that if he makes a decision, the people must trust him. Hans calls everyone to leave the barracks, as it is no longer safe to stay here. Then Hans is called over the radio by the cover group. He is informed that the zombies have begun to behave differently, moving faster and more aggressively. Hans hears the familiar roar of a monster coming from the street. He realizes that there is a wave of zombies near the warehouse, and the guys are now in great danger. Hans also realizes that the zombie wave was there all this time, but was in a waiting mode until it saw Hans's search party. A wave of zombies, consisting of aggressive and fast monsters, begins to approach the barracks where Hans and his 2 groups were located. Hans shouts for everyone to retreat inside the barracks and close the doors. Everyone manages to run inside before the zombies catch up with them. However, the door does not close and the guys can hardly hold back the onslaught of several dozen zombies. Siri asks what people should do now in such danger. Hans begins to wonder which mutant is controlling this wave of zombies, and he is horrified by the fact that he remembers what sound he just heard. In his opinion, this wave of zombies could be controlled by one of the strongest mutants he saw in the future. The guys close the doors, but it becomes more and more difficult. Hans calls in a cover group and asks them to distract the zombie horde. The janitor accepts Hans's order and says that they will do everything possible to save their friends. The janitor, Jean, and Ralph move out according to the outlined plan. Meanwhile, a crowd of hungry zombie soldiers is breaking into the barracks. One of them breaks through. He runs straight towards Hans. With one movement of his hand, Hans stops this monster. Then more zombies start crawling into the barracks, and Hans fights against them. Hans says to put on masks for everyone immediately. Meanwhile, on the street, Jin's group begins throwing grenades into the crowd of zombies surrounding the barracks. Explosions are heard, and the crowd of zombies' attention is diverted from the barracks. Hans says that face masks are necessary because after explosions there are zombie remains in the air, and you can get infected through your mouth. Hansi knocks down the doors to the barracks and tells everyone that this moment is the last chance to survive. Hans leads everyone into a fight for life against a hungry horde of zombies, eager to tear everyone apart and devour every last bone. Hans bursts into the crowd of the living dead, and with sharp movements of his blade, instantly ends their existence. Confidently and with particular precision, he eliminates one furious zombie after another, leaving them no chance. The newcomers of Hans's search party watch in surprise as the main character fights. They froze and watched as Hans single-handedly exterminated dozens of furious monsters, and only one word came to mind. This word and this word is art. And it is as art that they see the fighting style of the main character. When Hans finished his round, there was not a single zombie left around him. Only their blood was visible on the mask on his face. The rest of the squad approached Hans and awaited his further instructions. Suddenly, Hans hears a sound coming from his right, and he turns his head. From the red smoke, which was colored by the remains of zombie blood flying in the air, he saw some kind of silhouette. Hans removes his mask to get a better look at the impending danger. It was another crowd of monsters from the zombie wave, which are distinguished by their special speed and characteristic red eyes. There were 100 or more of them, approaching our main characters with every second. However, the crowd of enemies is stopped by Hans' cover group, who open fire on them. It was the janitor and Jin who promised to cover the main character and his squad. Next, Hans and his squad take the weapons that were in the cart near them and also open fire from machine guns at the zombies. Hans notices that the sniper that the military gave him in the squad shoots very well, and his percentage of hitting the target is even higher than his own. Hans thinks that this soldier will be a good member of his search party, who can be trusted after this fight. Suddenly, the newcomer that Kang Hyuk brought to the camp falls to the ground. We see that he has very severe facial injuries, and he cannot get up. Hans, everyone be prepared for an air attack, as it looks like a special mutant has appeared. The janitor dodges another aerial attack and doesn't understand what kind of mutant can throw other objects. He sees that something like a grenade of organic origin was thrown at him. Suddenly, Hans looks up at the roof of a nearby building and sees a dark, huge silhouette. He realizes with horror that he is looking at one of the most powerful mutated zombies he has ever encountered. We see that it is a huge zombie with dark green armored skin and yellow eyes. Hans says his name in his head with fear, David. David is a special mutated zombie that leads a wave of zombies and directs them. Until now, all Hans knows about him is that he is a long-range fighter, and no one has ever survived an encounter with him. This mutant throws organic grenades that it produces from its mouth. Suddenly, David throws another grenade towards our characters. Hans shouts to all the people that they need to dodge such attacks and not try to reflect them. The cleaner continues to dodge David's attacks and waits for Hans's plan. Hans starts shooting at David with a machine gun. We are shown that regular bullets from a machine gun penetrate David's armored skin and do no harm to him. David is very angry that Hans shot him, and now our characters will have a hard time. Hans shouts for everyone to retreat to cover, while he himself tries to buy time for his comrades to retreat. Hans is left to fight alone against the terrible monster, and tries to come up with a plan in his head on how he and the others can survive this difficult battle. David continues to throw his grenades, but now he is targeting the main character. Hans dodges these attacks but realizes that he can't do this for long. Hans yells at the janitor that the two of them need to retreat to discuss their next plan of action. Meanwhile, the janitor repels attacks from the other flank of the second wave of zombies and realizes that he really needs to retreat. David becomes very angry and is going to finish off our characters. Hans realizes that now is the time to run away and begins to move towards the weapons warehouse. The janitor joins the main character, and together they run away to the rest of the retreating people. Taking refuge in the building with the others, the characters have a few minutes to discuss a plan of action. Kang Hyuk provides medical assistance to his injured comrade. Siri asks Hans what he knows about such zombies and what they should do next. This question puts Hans in a very awkward position, and he begins to talk about what he knows about David. Hans says that David is the only type of mutant who can summon other mutants. Everyone froze in shock from what they heard, and waited for an explanation from the main character. Hans says that David can summon a second type of mutant, namely Goliath, a huge giant who can destroy any fence. According to Hans, he never saw people who fought against these two mutants survive. Then Jean asks Hans a very logical question about how to defeat these mutants. To this, the main character replies that no one can defeat them, and that anyone who intends to fight them will only face death. Hans says that due to the wave of zombies and the appearance of two special mutants at the same time, they will not have enough people to repel their attacks and survive. Then Jin asks a second, no less logical question to Hans, namely how he himself managed to survive if he had seen them before. At this, Hans sadly lowers his head and recalls the events of the past. He says that the only reason he survived the one time he met this mutant is because he ran away from him. Hans then remembers in his head how in the future his comrade taught him martial arts and subsequently stayed to fight against such a mutant. However, as expected, his friend was bitten by a zombie and turned into a monster himself, which is why no one has a single chance to survive in such a situation. After his thoughts, Hans asks if there are any people among the people who would risk their lives to give the others time to escape. However, no one agrees to risk their life to save others. Then Hans calls his best fighters and says that they will try to defeat David and Goliath, but they may all die today. Hans says that Jean will go with him, and they work together to take on David. After this, Hans divides the rest of the people into several groups. He tells the sniper soldier and the cleaner to attack Goliath, who should appear soon. He tells Kang Hyuk and his friends to provide cover for the previous two groups from regular zombies. The main character tasked everyone else with supplying ammunition, and providing assistance to those people who would be injured during the battle. Hans warns Jin that they will both likely die fighting David, but other people may survive. Jin replies that he will follow Hans even if they both die at the end of their mission. Meanwhile, David is waiting for his victims, whom he wants to continue hunting. We are shown a door handle which Hans opens and everyone freezes, as at that moment an incredible battle is about to begin. The door